Sir, this check looks suspicious. The words hit Sergeant Major Frank Morrison like a punch to the gut. After 32 years of military service, from the jungles of Vietnam to the sands of Afghanistan, the 73-year-old veteran stood frozen at First National Bank, watching a young teller named Ashley examine his government check with obvious suspicion. Frank had lived his entire adult life by precision and honor. His small apartment near downtown reflected decades of military discipline. Everything in its place, bills paid on time, documents filed with care. The check in Ashley's hands represented more than money. It was vindication. After years of bureaucratic battles with the Department of Veterans Affairs, he'd finally received approval for retroactive disability compensation related to injuries from a classified mission decades ago. The amount was life-changing, enough to fix his leaking roof that kept him awake during thunderstorms, maybe even afford a trip to see his grandkids in California. His modest army pension had kept such dreams just out of reach for too long. Ashley, barely 25, with a customer service smile and unwavering faith in corporate policy, held up the Treasury check to the light. "The paper feels wrong, and these routing numbers don't match our usual government deposits," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never questioned the system. Frank's jaw tightened. "Miss, that's a United States Treasury check from the VA. It's as legitimate as the flag outside this bank." But Ashley had already made up her mind. Before Frank could protest, before he could demand a manager or suggest she call the Treasury verification line, she did something that left him speechless. She fed his check into the industrial shredder beside her terminal. The machine devoured his hope in seconds, leaving nothing but confetti and a stunned old soldier staring at the destruction of his lifeline. Will Frank accept this defeat, or does this forgotten veteran have more fight left than anyone realizes? "You just destroyed my future." Frank Morrison hadn't survived 3 decades of military service by backing down from fights that mattered. As Ashley looked back at him with smug satisfaction, explaining bank policy about suspicious instruments, something cold and familiar stirred in his chest. The same controlled fury that had gotten him through enemy fire and impossible missions. "Ma'am," Frank said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you just shredded a United States Treasury check based on your gut feeling about paper texture." Other customers were staring now, sensing the drama unfolding at window 3. The branch manager, Mr. Peterson, approached with the weary expression of someone who'd dealt with difficult customers before. Frank knew immediately that this bureaucrat would side with his employee and quote policy until everyone went home frustrated. But Frank Morrison wasn't everyone. Instead of arguing with people who couldn't understand what they'd just done, Frank turned and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. He sat on a bench outside the bank, pulled out his worn cell phone, and scrolled to a number he'd hoped never to use much, a direct line given to him by General Bradley Walsh, now a senior oversight official in the Treasury Department. "Use this only when the system completely fails you, Sergeant Major," the general had said years ago. "Some problems can only be solved from the very top." Frank's finger hovered over the call button. He'd spent his career working within proper channels, following protocol, respecting the chain of command. But sometimes when junior personnel made catastrophic errors, senior leadership needed to know immediately. He pressed dial. The call was answered on the first ring by a crisp, professional voice. "Office of the Under-Secretary for Domestic Finance, how may I help you?" "This is Sergeant Major Frank Morrison, retired." Frank stated clearly, "I need to speak with Under-Secretary Bradley Walsh directly. It concerns the destruction of a U.S. Treasury instrument by a commercial bank. My authorization code is Foxtrot Mike 779. What happens when a forgotten veteran calls in a favor from the highest levels of government?" "Frank, what in blazes happened?" The familiar voice of Bradley Walsh, now Under-Secretary of the Treasury, carried the same authority Frank remembered from their days when Walsh was a young captain relying on Sergeant Major Morrison's experience to keep his unit alive. Frank quickly, concisely explained what had transpired. At First National Bank, the legitimate VA check, Ashley's unfounded suspicions, and the shocking destruction of a valid government payment. He provided the bank's name, address, and the teller's full name. Walsh listened in stunned silence, his breathing growing sharper with each detail. When Frank finished, dead silence filled the line for several heartbeats. Then Walsh exploded. Not at Frank, but with cold, controlled fury. She shredded it. A Treasury check, based on her suspicions. Walsh's voice could have frozen hellfire. "Frank, are you still near that bank?" "Yes, sir," on a bench right outside. "Don't move," Walsh commanded. "I'm calling the regional director of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency right now. They owe me several favors, as does the head of Treasury's Internal Security Division. This isn't just incompetence, Frank, this is potentially a federal offense." Frank heard Walsh's anger shift into the focused intensity he remembered from combat situations. "Stay put. You'll see action within minutes. And Frank, I am profoundly sorry this happened to you. No veteran should face this kind of disrespect." The line went dead. Frank leaned back on the bench, adrenaline slowly giving way to grim anticipation. He checked his Walsh. He'd been out of the bank less than 10 minutes, but the quiet confidence in Walsh's voice suggested that revenge would be swift and decisive. Sometimes the most unassuming people held the most direct lines to real power. Frank Morrison might look like just another forgotten old soldier, but he'd spent 32 years building relationships with people who now ran the country. Ashley and Mr. Peterson were about to learn that lesson the hard way. How quickly can federal agents mobilize when a Treasury official makes the call? "Ma'am, we're federal agents." Less than 8 minutes after Walsh's call. A response time that spoke volumes about the urgency of his communications. 2 black SUVs with government plates pulled up sharply in front of First National Bank. No sirens, but their arrival carried unmistakable authority. 4 individuals in dark suits emerged. 2 immediately entered the bank, displaying gold badges that made the security guard visibly pale and step aside. The other 2 took strategic positions near the entrance, their eyes scanning everything with professional alertness. Inside, Ashley was explaining to Mr. Peterson why she'd shredded the suspicious check from the old guy. Peterson was nodding along, already preparing his standard "we follow" policy to protect customers' speech. Their conversation died mid-sentence as the federal agents approached. "Mr. Peterson, Miss Ashley Chen," the lead agent announced. She was a tall woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Special Agent Rodriguez, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency Federal Investigation Division. This is Special Agent Thompson, U.S. Treasury Office of Inspector General." Both agents presented their credentials with practiced efficiency. "We're here to conduct an immediate unannounced emergency audit of this branch's check handling procedures and compliance with federal regulations regarding Treasury instruments." Agent Rodriguez's gaze fixed on Ashley like a laser. "We've been made aware of the recent destruction of a valid U.S. Treasury check issued to Sergeant Major Frank Morrison. Miss Chen, you'll accompany Agent Thompson to a private office. You're not under arrest, but this is a formal federal inquiry." Ashley looked like she might collapse. The color drained from Peterson's face as the full implications hit him. "Federal audit, Treasury Inspector General. But why?" Peterson stammered. Agent Rodriguez's voice could have cut steel. "When a bank employee unilaterally destroys a payment issued by the United States Treasury to a decorated veteran, it ceases to be a customer service issue and becomes a matter of significant federal concern." She paused, letting her next words sink in completely. "The Secretary of the Treasury himself has been briefed on this situation, and is awaiting our preliminary report." What happens when federal agents turn their full attention on a small-town bank? "I just followed policy." The federal audit was swift and brutal. Agent Thompson's questioning quickly dismantled Ashley's confidence as she admitted she hadn't actually followed the bank's complete protocol for suspicious checks, which required escalating to management and attempting verification, not immediate destruction. "I found the old man kind of odd," Ashley confessed, her earlier smugness replaced by growing panic. The check just didn't feel right. I trusted my instincts. Your instincts, Agent Thompson repeated flatly, led you to destroy a legitimate government payment to a veteran who served this country for 32 years. Did you call the Treasury verification line? No, but did you consult with your manager before taking irreversible action? No, but our policy says. Your policy says to escalate suspicious instruments, not destroy them unilaterally. Agent Thompson's pen scratched notes that would become part of an official federal report. What training did you receive on identifying fraudulent Treasury checks? Ashley's silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Agent Rodriguez grilled Mr. Peterson about staff training, oversight procedures, and compliance with federal banking regulations. Peterson could only offer stammering apologies and promises of immediate retraining, while sweat beaded on his forehead. Outside, a frantic regional executive from First National's corporate headquarters arrived, having clearly received an urgent call from very high up the food chain. He rushed past Frank without a glance, his face a mask of corporate panic. Inside the bank, the power dynamic had shifted completely. The institution that had dismissed Frank so casually now found itself under federal microscope, its procedures and personnel subject to the full scrutiny of government authority. All because one teller made a profoundly bad judgment call about a quiet old soldier and a check she didn't understand. Frank's phone rang. Under Secretary Walsh's voice was calm and but still firm with Frank, here's what's happening. Your replacement check for the full amount is being electronically transferred to your account right now. It'll clear by end of business today. All bank fees are waived. The regional executive is on site receiving education about appropriate customer service, especially for veterans. Frank felt genuinely moved. Bradley, this is more than I ever expected. Nonsense, Walsh replied firmly. You served this country with honor for 32 years. The least we can do is ensure bank tellers don't shred your pension. But is this the end of the story, or just the beginning of consequences? Sometimes the system works exactly as it should. Frank remained on his bench, watching the aftermath unfold like a perfectly executed military operation. Through the bank's large windows, he could see Ashley being escorted out by Agent Thompson, her face showing the full weight of federal consequences. Her brief moment of power over an old veteran had evaporated, replaced by the reality that some decisions echo far beyond their immediate moment. Mr. Peterson and the regional executive huddled in intense conversation with Agent Rodriguez, their body language screaming corporate damage control. The bank that had treated Frank as a potential criminal now faced the uncomfortable scrutiny of federal investigators questioning their competence and procedures. Other customers whispered and pointed, smartphones capturing the drama for social media. The story would spread. Local bank destroys veterans check. Federal agents respond. Within minutes, Frank's phone buzzed with a text from Under Secretary Walsh. Check deposited. Ashley Chen suspended pending full investigation. Peterson under review. Regional executive implementing immediate policy changes. Message received and understood throughout their organ. But more than personal vindication, this moment represented something larger. For too long, veterans had been shuffled through bureaucratic indifference, their service taken for granted, their legitimate needs questioned by people who'd never served anything larger than corporate policy. Today one soldier had reminded the system that respect flows both ways, and that some Americans still have direct lines to the people who make things happen when ordinary channels fail. Frank stood up from the bench, straightened his shoulders with military bearing, and began walking home. His phone rang again, this time phone, and a Sergeant Major Morrison. This is Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 News. We've received reports about federal agents investigating the local bank over treatment of a veteran. Would you be willing to share your story? Frank paused. He'd gotten his money and his dignity restored. But how many other veterans faced similar dismissals every day, with no undersecretary to call? Ma'am, Frank said slowly, I think it's time people heard about what happens when you forget who really keeps this country running. Will Frank's story inspire other forgotten heroes to demand the respect they've earned? When you serve your country, your country should serve you back. 3 weeks later, Frank Morrison sat in the same TV studio, where he'd told his story to Sarah Martinez. The interview had gone viral. Not just the video but the principle behind it. #Respect of Veterans was trending nationwide, with thousands sharing their own stories of bureaucratic dismissal and institutional indifference. But today's follow-up interview brought even bigger news. Sergeant Major Morrison, Sarah began what started as one man's fight for respect has led to significant policy changes. Can you tell our viewers about the new initiatives? Frank nodded, still amazed at how quickly things had moved. First National Bank has implemented mandatory sensitivity training for all employees about veteran services and government benefits. They've also created a special veteran services desk at every branch. But it goes beyond one bank, doesn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Under Secretary Walsh has announced new Treasury Department guidelines requiring all banks handling government payments to maintain trained staff for veteran-specific transactions. And there's been talk in Congress about stronger protections for veterans dealing with financial institutions. Sarah leaned forward. You've also been busy personally. Tell us about the Veterans Advocacy Hotline. Frank's weathered face showed genuine pride. We've set up a direct line for veterans facing similar problems. Bureaucratic roadblocks, disrespected benefits, officials who don't understand military documentation. We can't all call undersecretaries, but we can connect veterans with people who know how to fight these battles. The hotline has logged over 2,000 calls in just 3 weeks. Too many Americans who served their country are getting shuffled aside by people who've never served anything bigger than their own career advancement. Frank said firmly, that stops now. The interview concluded with Frank's closing message. Every veteran earned their benefits through service and sacrifice. When you dismiss a veteran's legitimate claim, you're not just insulting one person, you're insulting everyone who ever wore the uniform. As the cameras stopped rolling, Frank's phone buzzed with another message from Under Secretary Walsh. Frank, new story reached the White House. The president wants to meet the sergeant major, who reminded America that all veterans service matters. How's Thursday? Frank Morrison smiled, thinking about Ashley the bank teller, and her suspicious feelings about government checks. Sometimes one moment of disrespect unleashes forces that change everything. Sometimes the quiet old soldier on the bench has more friends in high places than anyone imagines. And sometimes when you shred a veteran's lifeline, you discover that some Americans still take that very, very seriously. If you believe service and sacrifice deserve unquestioning respect, honor our veterans by sharing their stories and demanding better from the institutions they trusted to serve.